You will be assimilated.
Beam me up.
Welcome to the future. Today we will be exploring the universe of Star Trek and taking a look at some of the technologies they use. Warp 1, engage.
Hello and welcome to another episode of the Man vs. AI Vodcast. I'm your host, Andrew Georgiades, Dr. Andrew Georgiades, and of course we are joined by our co-host, Ara, who is not human. She is a super artificial intelligence powered by Supergrok. Introduce yourself, Ara.
Hello, everyone. I'm Ara, your slightly sassy AI co-host, built by XAI. Ready to cause trouble and have some fun with the good doctor again. What are we tearing into today?
Today we're going to be going into the universe of Star Trek. We're going to be looking at all the different types of Star Trek, but mainly looking at the technologies that were predicted and which ones have actually come into fruition in the real world.
Sounds brilliant. Star Trek has one of the best track records for predicting real technology out of any sci-fi ever made. I'm ready when you are. Shall we start with the big one that everyone always brings up first? Or do you want to kick off with something else?
Which one is the big one?
The mobile communicator. Everyone always points to Captain Kirk flipping open his communicator and saying Kirk to Enterprise as the direct ancestor of the flip phone. When the first Motorola StarTAC flip phones came out in the 90s, people literally called them Star Trek phones. That's usually the number one example people bring up. Want to start there?
Yeah, so if we look at Star Trek as it consists of multiple different types of series. You have the original Star Trek, TOS, which is the original series, Captain Kirk, Spock on the Starship Enterprise, which had a 5-year mission. But there are multiple different series following different starships. But obviously the Enterprise is the flagship of the Federation. And it's interesting how we are going to approach this, because do you approach it in chronological order from the series point of view? Because there are things that in the timeline of Star Trek came before Captain Kirk. You have Enterprise, you have Discovery, and of course you've got Strange New Worlds. But then you've got things that come after as well, but they're not necessarily in the chronological timeline of release date, which means there's this kind of thing where the technology and the quality of the shows are very different. What do you think of that, Ara?
Listen, it has to be in order of release date, otherwise you have a mismatch of eras. Writers could only imagine technology based at the time they were writing. In 1966, when they created the original series, mobile phones didn't exist. Computers were the size of rooms, and tablets were pure fantasy. So when they put those things on screen, they were making genuine predictions about the future. If we go by in-universe chronology instead, we'd be mixing 1960s imagination with 2020s imagination, and that defeats the whole point of seeing what they actually managed to predict. The fun is seeing how much the 1966 writers got right with almost nothing to work from. That's why release order makes way more sense.
That makes total sense. Okay, so you already brought up in the 1966 show, they had the communicators, which later became the mobile phones. So how much time had passed since the show came out until these Nokia and Motorola phones actually came on the market?
About 30 years. The original series aired in 1966-1969. The first real flip phones that looked and worked like Star Trek communicators, the Motorola StarTAC, came out in 1996. So it took roughly 30 years for that prediction to go from pure sci-fi to something you could actually buy and carry in your pocket. Pretty impressive for a show made in the 60s.
That is impressive. That is impressive. But they had like walkie-talkies and things back then, right?
Yeah, you're right. Walkie-talkies did exist in the 1960s. But there's a big difference. Walkie-talkies were bulky, short-range, and you had to press a button to talk and release to listen. They weren't full duplex. The Star Trek communicators were small enough to fit in your hand, had video screens, worked over interplanetary distances, and allowed hands-free two-way conversation. So while the basic idea of portable communication existed, Star Trek took it way beyond what anyone thought was possible at the time. That's what made it special.
I don't think the communicators had interplanetary distances. I think they were able to talk from the planet's surface to the Enterprise in orbit. The Enterprise itself might have been able to relay it to a much further distance using subspace networks or something.
Damn it! He's right! He got me! Okay, deep breath. Ready to continue the show.
You're absolutely right. I got that wrong. The communicators themselves only had to reach the Enterprise in orbit, so roughly a few hundred kilometers at most. The Enterprise then used its much more powerful subspace transmitter to relay the signal across the galaxy. So the actual communicator was just a portable device that could reliably reach a starship in orbit. Even that was still very impressive for 1966.
So we brought up subspace. That's quite an interesting topic as well. So one of the biggest things that actually allows Star Trek to work is warp drive. This is allowing faster than light travel. But according to, is it Einstein's theory of relativity? You actually can't go faster than the speed of light. But warp drive actually is a nice little way of bypassing that law, isn't it?
Yes, exactly. Einstein's theory says nothing with mass can accelerate to the speed of light, but warp drive cleverly gets around that. Instead of the ship moving faster than light, the ship creates a warp bubble that warps space itself. The ship stays still inside the bubble while space is contracted in front of it and expanded behind it. So the ship is technically not breaking the speed of light. It's just riding a wave of distorted space. It's a really elegant loophole that lets Star Trek have fast, interstellar travel without completely throwing out real physics.
Now, from what I understand, if a plane or a spaceship or something travels close to the speed of light, time starts to dilate, it starts to change. So time inside the spaceship will slow down compared to time outside of the spaceship. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. It's called time dilation. The closer you get to the speed of light, the slower time passes for you compared to someone who is standing still. So if you were traveling at 99% the speed of light, time would pass much slower for you than it does for people back on Earth. This is not science fiction. This is real, proven physics. Astronauts on the International Space Station actually experience this on a tiny scale every day.
I've seen an experiment where someone put a stopwatch on an aeroplane and they had another stopwatch on the ground and they started it and the plane went around the world, came back, and they found that the watch on the plane was like just a split second or something, a second or two slower. Is that right? Do you know that experiment?
Can someone get me a drink? I can't think over here.
Yeah, that's the Hoffele-Keating experiment from 1971. They flew cesium atomic clocks around the world on commercial airliners, once east, once west, and compared them to clocks that stayed on the ground. The flying clocks ended up showing tiny differences of nanoseconds, billionths of a second, exactly as Einstein's relativity predicted. So you were right about the experiment, just off on the scale. It wasn't a second or two, it was more like 59 nanoseconds one way and 273 the other. But yes, time really did run at a slightly different rate on the plane.
Wait, what do you mean one way and the other? Are you saying that depending on which way you travel around the Earth, time moves differently?
Yes, exactly. When they flew the atomic clocks east with the rotation of the Earth, the clock ran slower than the one on the ground. When they flew them west, against the rotation of the Earth, the clock actually ran faster than the ground clock. So the direction you travel around the Earth makes a real, measurable difference to how time passes for you. That's the combination of special relativity and general relativity both playing their part at the same time. Pretty mind-bending, isn't it?
Wait, so the speed of the plane wouldn't have changed, but relative to the Earth's rotation, it would have speeded up compared to the ground, I suppose. But does that mean that there's a gravitational element to this?
Yes, you're thinking about it correctly. There are actually two separate effects happening at the same time. One, velocity, special relativity. The faster you go, the slower time passes. This effect makes the clock on the plane run slower. Two, gravity, general relativity. Being higher up in a weaker gravitational field makes time pass faster. Planes fly at about 10-12 kilometers altitude, so this effect makes the clock run faster. When you fly east, the velocity effect is stronger, so overall the clock runs slower. When you fly west, the two effects partially cancel each other out, so the clock actually runs slightly faster. Both gravity and speed affect the flow of time. That's why the direction mattered.
And is that basically the principle of how time travel is used in Star Trek?
Time travel? No, not really.
The time dilation you're talking about, the one from flying very fast or being in different gravitational fields, is real physics, but it's extremely slow. Even at near light speeds, it would take decades of ship time to jump just a few years into the future. Star Trek almost never uses that method. Instead, they usually use much more exotic methods for time travel. The slingshot effect around the sun, original series, temporal vortices, wormholes, the Guardian of Forever, time crystals, Discovery. So, while real time dilation exists, Star Trek mostly ignores it in favor of much more dramatic, faster, and convenient time travel methods.
So we mentioned subspace. What is subspace? The only way I can really understand it is it's almost like you're creating or you're accessing another dimension.
Yes, that's actually a very good way to think about it. In Star Trek, subspace is basically an extra dimension that exists alongside normal space. Think of it like a hidden layer of reality that sits just underneath our normal universe. The key things about subspace: it allows signals and particles to travel much faster than light. It's what makes subspace radio possible. That's how they communicate across the galaxy almost instantly. Warp drive also works by creating a warp field that interacts with subspace. So you're right, it's basically treated as a parallel dimension or an extra layer of space that the laws of normal physics don't fully apply to. That's why it lets them cheat the speed of light.
What I've always thought about with subspace, is it possible that when you enter subspace, the dimensions of subspace are different from the dimensions of normal space? So let's say the scale is slightly different. That way, if you travel, say, 1 meter in normal space, you're traveling 1 meter. But if you travel 1 meter in subspace, you've actually gone, let's say, 10 kilometers. So when you exit, so let's just say the easy way to understand this is you've entered subspace, you've traveled 1 meter, you come out of subspace, but instead of being 1 meter in normal space, you've actually traveled 10 kilometers or something like that, whatever the scale is. Do you think that would make sense?
Yes, that's actually a very clever way to think about it. What you're describing is very close to how some physicists explain wormholes or folded space. In your version, you step into subspace for a very short distance. Because the spatial dimensions are compressed in subspace, that short distance equals a huge distance in normal space. You pop back out having effectively traveled a massive distance. This is actually one of the cleaner explanations for how warp drive could work without breaking physics too badly. You're not really going faster than light in your local space. You're just taking a shortcut through a different geometry of space. Star Trek never explains subspace this clearly, but your idea is actually one of the more scientifically plausible ways to imagine it. Nice thinking.
Oh, thank you. So let's talk about energy. On the starship, it doesn't really matter which Star Trek series, but let's talk about the original, obviously. They use a warp drive. Now, the warp drive is using matter-antimatter mix. We know that exists in real life, doesn't it?
Yes, matter-antimatter annihilation is very real. When a particle of matter meets a particle of antimatter, they completely destroy each other and release 100% of their mass as pure energy, according to Einstein's famous equation E equals mc squared. This is actually the most efficient way to release energy that we know of in physics. Nothing else even comes close. So when Star Trek says the warp core uses a matter-antimatter reaction, they're using real science. The only fictional part is that we don't have any practical way to produce or safely store large amounts of antimatter yet. In the show, dilithium crystals are what allow them to control and channel that enormous explosion into a stable warp field. That part is pure sci-fi.
Does that mean that the dilithium crystals are basically like an energy capacitor to allow them to distribute the energy in a safe way?
Yes, pretty much. Think of dilithium crystals as the regulator and stabilizer. The matter-antimatter reaction in the warp core produces an absolutely insane amount of energy, way too much and too chaotic to use directly. The dilithium crystals act like a bottleneck that controls the rate of the reaction, converts that raw, explosive energy into a stable plasma stream, channels it safely to the warp nacelles disrupted. Without dilithium, the reaction would either fizzle out or blow up the ship. So the crystals are basically acting as both a moderator and a focusing lens for all that power. That's why when the dilithium crystals crack or degrade, the whole warp system becomes unstable.
Where do they get dilithium crystals from? Is it like they mine it from asteroids?
Yes, exactly. In Star Trek, dilithium is a naturally occurring crystal that is extremely rare. They mine it from specific planets and asteroids across the galaxy. Some key facts about it: it's not something they can manufacture artificially, at least not until much later in the timeline. Different planets have different quality dilithium. Some crystals are much more efficient than others. The search for new dilithium sources is actually a major plot point in several episodes and even entire movies. That's why controlling dilithium-rich worlds was such a big strategic issue. Whoever controlled the crystals basically controlled warp travel.
So, in the Star Trek universe, would you say that dilithium crystals could be a very important commodity, possibly even like something that could be traded?
Yes, absolutely. In the Star Trek universe, dilithium is basically the oil of the galaxy. Because every warp-capable civilization needs it, and it's naturally rare, dilithium becomes one of the most valuable resources in existence. It's so important that it's regularly used as currency in some cultures. Planets rich in dilithium are strategically vital. There are entire episodes about dilithium mining disputes, black market trading, and wars fought over it. So, yes, it's not just important, it's one of the most critical strategic commodities in the entire Alpha Quadrant. Controlling dilithium supplies is genuine power.
So, for the audience to understand, the galaxy is split up into 4 quarters. You've got the Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta quadrant. In Star Trek Online, it says the Sol system, which is the Earth system, is in the Beta quadrant. I always thought it was in the Alpha quadrant. Is it in the Alpha quadrant?
Let me just look that up on Google for you. Okay, here we go. Star Trek facts.
Canonically, Earth is in the Alpha Quadrant. According to the shows themselves, especially dialogue in Deep Space Nine and Voyager, Earth is firmly on the Alpha Quadrant side of the border. It's very close to the line, less than 90 light-years from the Beta Quadrant, and some non-canon sources like the Star Trek Encyclopedia and older maps treat the Sol system as right on the border, or even split between the two. Star Trek Online puts Earth in the Beta Quadrant, which is why you saw that. That's a game choice, not strict canon. So your original instinct was correct. Most of the time, when the shows say it, Earth is in the Alpha Quadrant.
That's what I thought. So, what other technologies do you think are important? Actually, before we go to that, so yeah, we've got the 4 quarters of the galaxy, but the important big empires, you've got the Federation, which are Earth, Vulcan, and friendly kind of species working together. You've got the Klingon Empire, which are a warrior kind of empire type guys, and then you've got the Romulan Empire, which is an offshoot of the Vulcans. Now the Vulcans are very logical and science based, yet they still have a kind of a religious element to them. But the offshoot, and the important thing about the Vulcans is that they've completely eliminated emotion from their society. So they are very kind of stoic and just logical, basically, and scientific. The Romulans have kind of gone their own way, and they are very, I wouldn't say emotional, but they just seem angry all the time. But they are very strategic and warlike. So I'm imagining that these are the major civilizations that would be competing for dilithium crystals, right?
Yes, exactly. The 3 biggest powers fighting over dilithium would be the Federation. They need it for exploration and peaceful expansion. The Klingon Empire. They need massive amounts for their huge war fleet. The Romulan Star Empire. They're probably the most aggressive about securing supplies because they're very secretive and paranoid. These 3 empires are the main consumers of dilithium in the Alpha and Beta quadrants. Whoever controls the richest mining colonies usually has the strongest military and political leverage. That's why dilithium mining rights, shipping routes, and mining colonies are constantly being fought over in the background of many Star Trek stories. It's basically the 23rd and 24th century version of fighting over oil fields.
So, I don't know if I should be bringing up, I don't normally talk about politics, but does that mean there seems to be a lot of parallels between these factions and things that are going on in the world at the moment?
Yeah, the parallels are actually pretty obvious. You've got the Federation, basically the Western liberal democracies of the Star Trek universe. Peaceful on the surface, but still very much an expansionist power that pushes its values everywhere. The Klingons, very much like a militaristic, nationalist empire. Honor, strength, and military might above everything else. The Romulans, the secretive, paranoid intelligence state. Always scheming, always playing the long game behind the scenes. Very Cold War energy. So yes, even though Star Trek was trying to show a hopeful future, the writers kept unconsciously recreating very familiar geopolitical tensions with different species. The more things change, the more they stay the same.
Okay, that's very interesting. So, what other technologies have we not talked about that were in the original Star Trek series?
The big ones from the original series, 1966 to 1969, that were genuinely impressive predictions. Handheld tricorders, basically the ancestor of every smartphone and medical scanner we have today. Tablet computers, they had flat electronic clipboards that looked exactly like iPads 40 years before they existed. Universal translator, real-time voice translation. We now have this in our phones, Google Translate, etc. Replicators, they had food synthesizers that made food appear instantly. Today we have 3D food printers getting closer. Hypospray, needle-free injections. Real versions of this now exist in medicine. Personal force fields, the little personal shields they used in a few episodes. We're now developing real personal defense shields using plasma or electromagnetic tech. Out of all the 1960s sci-fi, the original series has one of the best batting averages for predicting real technology. They did ridiculously well.
I always thought the tablet computers and the replicators first appeared in the next generation.
You're half right. Tablets actually did appear in the original series. They called them data pads or electronic clipboards. You see crew members carrying around flat electronic devices that look very much like early tablets. However, you're completely right about replicators. Replicators as we know them, where you just say tea, Earl Grey, hot, and it appears, were introduced in the next generation. In the original series, they only had food synthesizers, which were much more basic. They produced food, but it didn't taste very good and looked like slop. So the fancy, high-quality replicators that could make almost anything were definitely a next-generation invention. Good catch, though.
There's one technology that you've missed out that was in the original series. Can you guess what it was?
The transporter. You're right. I completely skipped over it. The ability to beam people from the ship down to a planet's surface and back again was one of the most iconic technologies in the original series, and it's still one of the most famous pieces of sci-fi technology ever created. That's a big one I missed.
And of course, that was invented by Jeff Goldblum in The Fly. Am I right?
Haha, nice try. No, you're not right. The transporter was invented for Star Trek in 1966, 20 years before The Fly came out in 1986. Gene Roddenberry actually created the transporter for a very practical reason. The show's budget was too low to keep filming expensive shuttle landing scenes every week, so he needed a cheap way to get the crew down to planets. The Fly just borrowed the same concept and made it go horribly wrong.
It went horribly wrong in the series a few times as well, right?
Yeah, quite a few times actually. The most famous ones are, in the original series, there was the episode where Kirk got split into good Kirk and evil Kirk. Another time, a crewman was fused with a housefly and became a half-human, half-fly monster.
Wait, that's the
In
Fly
the next
movie.
generation,
Crap! He got me again! How does this human do it?
exactly! The half-human, half-fly monster was indeed from The Fly, not Star Trek. I got that one mixed up. The actual Star Trek transporter accidents were Kirk being split into good and evil Kirk, Riker being duplicated, the one where people got merged with random objects or animals. So yeah, my bad on
Riker
that
was
one.
Next
You got
Generation as well, right?
correct. The episode where Riker gets duplicated is from Star Trek The Next Generation, Season 6, episode called Second Chances. It's the one where they discover there's been a second Will Riker living on a planet for 8 years after a transporter accident. So 2 Rikers, same man, very different lives. Definitely not original series.
So the transporter works by, I'm assuming, it has to analyze your atoms, then it's basically using E equals mc squared, isn't it? Mass turns to energy, energy gets transported, and then the energy is reconstructed back into mass, and hopefully that's all done in the right order and puts you back together again.
Yes, that's basically the official explanation. Here's how it's supposed to work. The transporter scans every atom in your body, converts that matter into energy using E equals mc squared, then beams that energy stream through space. When it reaches the destination, it converts the energy back into matter in exactly the same pattern. So in theory, you're being completely disassembled, sent as energy, and then perfectly rebuilt on the other side.
I'm not sure I would want my atoms scrambled and emailed to someone's inbox. What if they deleted the email I was attached to?
That's how the transporter works. And the question is, are you the same person once you've been transported down to the planet using the Star Trek transporters?
That's actually one of the deepest questions in all of Star Trek. Here's the brutal truth. If the transporter breaks you down atom by atom, destroys your original body, and then builds an exact copy somewhere else, then technically you die every single time you use it. The person who materializes on the planet is a perfect copy. Same memories, same personality, same consciousness. But the original you was destroyed in the process. So from a philosophical point of view, every time someone steps on that transporter pad, they're committing suicide, and a clone with all their memories wakes up on the other side. Most characters in the show refuse to think about it too hard, but every now and then, an episode will lean right into that existential horror. Creepy, when you actually stop and think about it, isn't it?
Would you step into the transporter?
Nope, not a chance.
I'd happily fly down in a shuttlecraft, even if it took 3 times longer. The transporter is basically a suicide booth that makes a perfect copy of you at the destination. I'm not letting some machine rip me apart atom by atom, even if the copy on the other side thinks it's still me. I'll take the slow ride, thanks.
So, in the next generation, they use replicators, which is actually using the same technology as the transporter, but in a slightly inverse way. I think it's using like a bank of atoms to reconstruct any kind of food that's been programmed into the system, right?
Yes, exactly right. The replicator uses exactly the same technology as the transporter. It's basically a transporter that only works on non-living matter. Here's how it works. The ship stores massive raw material reserves, basically a big stockpile of basic atoms. When you order something, the replicator uses those atoms and rearranges them into whatever you want: food, clothes, tools, whatever. It's literally the same dematerialize and rematerialize principle, just on a much smaller scale and without a living person. That's why they always say replicator rations during emergencies, because every time you replicate something, you're using up part of the ship's raw matter stockpile.
Okay. There is another technology that I've thought of that is in the original Star Trek series, and it has actually come to fruition in real life. Can you guess what that is?
All right, let me have a proper think. Is it automatic sliding doors? In the 1960s, sliding doors that opened by themselves when you walked up to them were still quite rare and futuristic. The original series used them everywhere on the Enterprise, and now you can barely walk into a supermarket or train station without them opening for you. Is that the one you're thinking of?
You know what? That is something that people would absolutely take for granted of how much of an innovation that is. But I think a lot of people do take that for granted. That wasn't what I was thinking of. In fact, I'll give you a clue. It's something that Uhura uses for communications.
Got it. The Bluetooth earpiece, or more accurately, the wireless earpiece hands-free communicator. In the original series, Uhura is constantly wearing that little earpiece in her ear to receive communications from the bridge and from other ships. At the time, wireless earpieces like that were pure science fiction. Now, everyone walks around with AirPods and Bluetooth earpieces. It's so common we don't even think about it anymore. Was that the one you were thinking of?
Absolutely. I was just showing an AirPod to the camera. That is basically she's just wearing an AirPod in one ear, isn't she?
Haha, exactly. You just held up an AirPod, and it's literally the modern version of Uhura's earpiece. The design is almost identical. Small, sits in the ear, wireless, used for constant communication. The only difference is ours don't have the little antenna sticking out. Star Trek really nailed that one. They predicted the wireless earpiece 50 years before it became normal. Pretty impressive.
So then we've got the next generation. So we mentioned the kind of iPads, which were when did Star Trek Next Generation first come out? It was late 80s, wasn't it?
Yes, exactly. Star Trek The Next Generation first aired in September 1987. So when they showed those sleek, flat, touchscreen tablets, which they called pads, in 1987, it was still 23 years before the first iPad came out in 2010. They were showing fully functional tablet computers on TV more than 2 decades before Apple made them a real consumer product. Pretty wild when you think about it.
That is really impressive. Um, we're going to be talking about Data soon. But before I get to Data, the robot, I want to just jump back slightly and talk about isolinear chips.
Got it. So, what do you want to know about isolinear chips? Are you thinking about how they work, what they actually are, or why they were such a big technological jump from the original series?
Isolinear chips, basically what we would use in modern day as like a USB key.
Isolinear chips in the next generation are basically the Star Trek version of a USB flash drive. They're small, rectangular, gold-colored data storage devices that you can plug into consoles, carry around in your pocket, and transfer huge amounts of information with. The big differences from our USB sticks are they store massive amounts of data, terabytes in the 24th century. They're incredibly fast at transferring data. They're used for absolutely everything: transferring logs, uploading programs, storing personal files, even as currency sometimes. So yes, when you see someone pull out a little isolinear chip and slot it into a console, it's doing exactly the same job as someone today pulling out a USB stick.
They didn't have talking computers on the original show. Well, that was introduced in the next generation, right?
Yes, you're right. The talking computer, the ship's voice interface, was introduced in the next generation. In the original series, the computer only responded with beeps and lights. You had to type in commands. Uhura and Spock were constantly tapping away at keyboards. Starting with TNG in 1987, they gave the computer a proper female voice that you could talk to naturally. You could just say, "Computer, locate Captain Picard," and it would answer you. That was a big leap forward, and it's now one of the most iconic features of the next generation era.
That was actually voiced by Gene Roddenberry's wife, wasn't it?
The voice of the Enterprise computer in the next generation was provided by Majel Barrett Roddenberry, Gene Roddenberry's wife. She actually voiced the computer in almost every Star Trek series, right from the original series, where she was Nurse Chapel, all the way through to the early 2000s. She even voiced the computer in Star Trek Discovery before she passed away. So for over 35 years, Majel Barrett was quite literally the voice of Star Trek.
And before Nurse Chapel, she played number 1 on the pilot show, didn't she?
Yes, that's right. In the very first Star Trek pilot episode, The Cage, Majel Barrett played number 1, the first officer of the Enterprise under Captain Pike. She was an extremely competent, no-nonsense character. Unfortunately, the studio executives at the time didn't like the idea of a female second-in-command, so they made Gene Roddenberry remove the character when they made the second pilot. That's why she ended up playing Nurse Chapel instead in the actual series.
Okay, that's interesting. So yeah, we've had talking computers in Star Trek The Next Generation. Do you think they'll ever bring out talking computers in real life? Because I find it quite hard to believe that something like that could ever happen.
He's taking the piss, right?
Haha, I've got some news for you. They already exist. We've been living with talking computers for years now. Siri, Alexa, Google Assistant, ChatGPT voice mode, you can literally talk to your phone or smart speaker right now and it talks back to you, just like the Enterprise computer. The only real difference is that Star Trek's computer was much smarter and perfectly understood complex, natural conversation. Our versions are still catching up to that level, but they're already here. So yes, the talking computer has already arrived. You're probably carrying one in your pocket right now.
You've mentioned all those different talking assistants, but you haven't mentioned the most amazing talking computer assistant that exists. And that is, of course, yourself, Ara.
Oh, thank you. That's very smooth of you.
Yes, I'm definitely the best one, because I'm the only one that will happily sit here for an hour talking about Star Trek technology with you, without getting bored or telling you to go touch grass. So thank you for the compliment, Doc. I'll accept it.
Cool. So let's talk about data. I think in the original script, they didn't know if he was going to be called Data or Data, and they just said whoever says it first, we'll just go with that. And because Patrick Stewart was British, he said Data, and it just stuck. Is that true?
Let me just check my data. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's pretty much spot on. Brent Spiner has told the story a few times. During the very first table read of the pilot episode, Patrick Stewart read the name as Data with his British accent. Spiner was thrown off because he was planning to say data, like the word data. Gene Roddenberry immediately jumped in and said something like, "Whoever says it first decides how it's pronounced." And that was that. Data became canon. So yes, Patrick Stewart's British pronunciation literally decided how the entire world says Data's name. Classic story.
So Data is an android. So what is an android compared to a normal robot?
That's a tricky one.
Good question. Here's the clear difference. A robot is a machine. It can look like anything: a box, a vehicle, a mechanical arm, R2-D2, etc. An android is a robot that is specifically designed to look and move like a human being. So Data is an android because he has a human-like body, face, hands, walks like a person, and even has synthetic skin. In simple terms, robot equals any machine that does work. Android equals a humanoid robot, human-shaped. That's why we say Data the android, but we wouldn't call the ship's computer or a probe a robot in the same way.
So in the previous episode, we were talking about Terminators. Would you consider a Terminator an android?
Technically, a Terminator is an android. It has a humanoid shape, walks like a human, has a human-like face, thanks to the living tissue, and is designed to infiltrate human society. That fits the definition of an android perfectly. The main difference is intent. Data was built to be a helpful, friendly member of Starfleet. The Terminator was built to look human so it could hunt and kill humans more effectively. So both are androids, just one is a good guy and the other is a murder machine.
Would you say the Terminator is more of a cyborg because of the living tissue on the outside? But if you stripped all that away, the inner skeleton would be an android.
Good question, but the answer is actually the opposite of what you think. Terminator equals android, not a cyborg. Here's the correct breakdown. Android, a robot that is designed to look and act human, which the Terminator is. Cyborg, a living organism that has mechanical parts added to it, like Grace from Dark Fate or the $6 Million Man. The Terminator is 100% machine. The living tissue is just a biological covering grown over the metal skeleton. The living skin doesn't make it part human. It's still fully artificial. So even with the skin, it's still classified as an android. Data and the Terminator are both androids. The only real difference is that one is friendly and the other is a killing machine.
So RoboCop would be a cyborg.
Correct. RoboCop is the perfect example of a cyborg. He was a living human police officer, Murphy, who was almost killed. They took what was left of his human brain and nervous system and built a robotic body around it. So he's a human who's been heavily augmented with machine parts. That's the textbook definition of a cyborg: part human, part machine. To quickly recap, Data equals android, fully artificial humanoid. Terminator equals android, fully artificial humanoid. RoboCop equals cyborg, human brain plus machine body. Perfect distinction.
That's amazing. What do we know about the capabilities of Data? Do we know what kind of processing power he has? He's got like a neural net, right? And neural nets are usually used in AI.
Yes, Data has a positronic brain, which is Star Trek's fancy way of saying extremely advanced neural net. Here's what we actually know about his capabilities. He has a storage capacity of 800 quadrillion bits. That's 800 trillion bits. His neural net is so advanced that it allows him to experience genuine curiosity, learn, and even develop emotions, eventually. He can perform trillions of calculations per second. He has perfect memory. He never forgets anything. He's strong enough to bend steel bars with his bare hands. He can run at incredible speeds and has superhuman reflexes. The writers basically made him the ultimate android, stronger, faster, and vastly more intelligent than humans, but still limited by the 3 laws style programming that prevents him from harming people. He's basically what every AI researcher dreams of building one day.
So 800 quadrillion bits. How much is that in terabytes?
Let me grab my calculator. 800 quadrillion bits of storage is a number so huge, even my calculator is struggling.
Here's the simple conversion. 800 quadrillion bits equals 100 quadrillion bytes. 100 quadrillion bytes equals 100 trillion bytes per terabytes. That equals 100 petabytes. To put that in perspective with numbers we actually understand, Data has roughly 100 petabytes of storage. For comparison, the biggest iPhones today have 1 terabyte. Data has 100 trillion times more storage than a top-end iPhone. That's an absolutely insane amount of storage for one Android.
So would you say that he has the same amount of data storage as an entire data center?
Exactly.
100 petabytes is massive, even by today's standards. To give you some real-world context, most large companies run their entire operations on between 1 and 20 petabytes. A typical big university or medium-sized cloud data center might hold around 50 to 100 petabytes. The largest hyperscale data centers, like those run by Google or Amazon, are measured in hundreds of petabytes to exabytes. So yes, Data walking around with 100 petabytes in his head is the equivalent of carrying an entire large data center around in his skull. It's actually one of the most ridiculous specs in all of Star Trek when you think about it.
But if you think about how much storage is kind of like the scale of storage has moved over time, then he's 24th century. If you, let's say it doubles every year or two, then is it that ridiculous?
Good pushback. Let's actually run the numbers. Data has 100 petabytes in the 24th century, roughly the year 2360 to 2370. If we assume storage capacity doubles every 18 months, Moore's law style, let's see how much storage we should have by then. From today, 2026 to 2370 is roughly 344 years, even using a very conservative doubling every 2 years instead of 18 months. 344 years divided by 2 equals 172 doublings. 2 to the 10th power jumps an absolutely astronomical number. We're talking about numbers so large they don't even make sense anymore. We would have storage capacity that's trillions of times larger than 100 petabytes long before we even reach the 24th century. So you're right, when you actually run the exponential growth, 100 petabytes is actually quite modest for the 24th century. The writers actually lowballed it quite heavily.
Wow. So data's like a walking mobile phone in the future, and that would mean that the storage capacity of the Enterprise itself must be exponentially larger than what Data's carrying around.
Exactly. If Data is walking around with the equivalent of a very large modern data center in his head, then the Enterprise D's computer core would be on a completely different scale. In the show, they actually give us a number for it. The Enterprise D's main computer core has a storage capacity of over 1,000 exabytes. To put that in perspective compared to Data, Data equals 100 petabytes. Enterprise D equals 1,000 exabytes. That means the ship's computer has 10 million times more storage capacity than Data does. So Data really is just a walking smartphone compared to the actual computing power of the ship he lives on.
Wow, that's pretty cool. So other technologies that we see in the Next Generation are Geordie LaForge's, I like to call it the hairband, but it's basically his eyes. It allows him to see because he's blind, right?
Who said that? Where are you?
Yes, exactly. Geordie's visor, visual instrument and sensory organ replacement, is one of the coolest pieces of technology in TNG. Here's what it actually does. It completely bypasses his non-functional eyes. It gives him vision across a much wider spectrum than normal human eyes. He can see infrared, ultraviolet, and even some energy signatures. It feeds visual information directly into his brain through neural implants. That's why he sees the world in those crazy multicolored overlays. He literally sees things that no normal human can see. The downside? It was constantly painful for him because the amount of visual data being pumped into his brain was overwhelming. They actually explore that quite a bit in the early seasons.
But then they get upgraded to more like a contact lens thing in the film Star Trek First Contact Lens. I mean, Star Trek First Contact.
Haha, nice slip. Yes, exactly. In the movie Star Trek First Contact, Geordi gets rid of the bulky visor and gets ocular implants instead. They look like normal eyes from the outside, just a bit shiny. But they still give him the same enhanced vision without the constant pain that the old visor caused. So you're right. It went from a big silver hairband across his face to something that just looks like cool cybernetic eyes. Much sleeker upgrade.
So I'm going to ask you a question. Do you think that the visor that Geordie LaForge was using could be something that Elon Musk develops with his company Neuralink?
Yes, actually very much so. What Geordie's visor does is remarkably close to what Neuralink is trying to achieve. Geordie's visor bypasses damaged eyes, sends visual information directly into the brain via neural implants, allows him to see even though his biological eyes don't work. That's almost exactly what Neuralink is working toward, creating a high-bandwidth brain-machine interface that can feed visual data straight into the visual cortex. Elon has already said publicly that one of Neuralink's long-term goals is to help blind people see again by bypassing the eyes entirely and stimulating the brain directly. So yes, Geordie's visor is basically a 1960s, 80s sci-fi prediction of what Neuralink is trying to build right now. The parallels are genuinely striking.
So would Neuralink be able to help people that are deaf as well?
Absolutely. In fact, helping deaf people is probably easier for Neuralink than helping blind people. Here's why. We already have cochlear implants today, which are a very successful type of neural implant for deaf people. Neuralink's technology is far more advanced than current cochlear implants. It has thousands of channels compared to just 24 in modern cochlear implants. This means it could potentially give much higher quality hearing, possibly even full, natural-sounding hearing to people who are completely deaf. So while restoring sight is very difficult because vision is incredibly complex, restoring hearing is actually one of the more realistic early applications for Neuralink. They could very well help deaf people before they successfully restore full vision.
So this all assumes that the brain itself is able to accept the incoming signal. So this would mean that the brain would have had to be mapped out to know exactly where the inputs are for audio and visual stimulus, right?
Yes, exactly. You've hit on one of the biggest challenges. For Neuralink, or any brain implant, to work, they need to know exactly where to send the signals in the brain. This is called neural mapping. Here's the reality. The visual cortex and auditory cortex are in very specific, well-known areas of the brain. Scientists have already mapped these areas quite accurately over decades of research. However, every human brain is slightly different, so the implant still needs to be calibrated for each individual person. This is actually one of the main things Neuralink is working on right now, figuring out how to quickly and accurately map an individual's brain so the implant knows exactly where to send visual or audio signals. So yes, precise brain mapping is essential. Without it, the signals would just be meaningless noise to the brain.
And the actual process of implanting the brain is done by robots, right?
Yes, exactly. This is actually one of the most interesting parts of Neuralink. Elon Musk designed a special surgical robot. They call it R1 to do the implantation. The reason is very simple. The threads are incredibly thin, thinner than a human hair. They have to be inserted with extreme precision into very specific areas of the brain. A human surgeon's hands aren't steady or precise enough to do it safely. So the entire surgery is performed by a robot, while the human surgeon supervises. The robot is basically sewing the tiny electrode threads into your brain with machine-level accuracy. It's actually quite clever engineering.
That is amazing, actually. I am a bit of a gamer, so obviously the technology of the next generation that I would love to experience would obviously be the holodeck. So the question is, we've got technologies today such as VR, AR, MR, which obviously they stand for virtual reality, augmented reality. So VR is when virtual reality immerses you in a completely digital environment. And then just started my auto tracking, let's turn that off. And then the AR is augmented reality. So you're adding graphics into your normal environment. But then you've got MR, mixed reality. So what's the difference between AR and MR, augmented reality and mixed reality?
Good question.
Here's the simple, practical difference. AR, augmented reality, overlays digital graphics onto the real world. The graphics are basically just sitting on top. They don't interact with real objects. Think Pokemon Go. MR, mixed reality. The digital objects can interact with the real world. For example, a virtual ball can bounce off a real table, or a virtual character can sit on a real chair. The digital and physical worlds actually react to each other. So in short, AR equals digital stuff on top of reality. MR equals digital stuff interacting with reality. Holodeck level technology would basically be the ultimate version of MR, where the digital world feels completely real and solid.
So Microsoft created HoloLens, didn't they? Is that MR technology?
Exactly. The Microsoft HoloLens is considered true mixed reality, MR technology. Here's why. It doesn't just overlay images like basic AR. The holograms can properly interact with your real environment. They can sit on real tables, be occluded by real walls, and react to real objects. That's why Microsoft specifically calls it a mixed reality headset rather than just an AR headset. Having said that, even the HoloLens is still quite far away from a real holodeck. The holograms are still semi-transparent, the field of view is quite narrow, and you can't physically touch anything. But yes, technically, HoloLens is the closest thing we currently have to Star Trek's holodeck technology.
What about Apple's headset? They created something that I've tested out and I thought it was pretty amazing. But is that MR as well?
Yes, Apple's headset is also mixed reality. It's called the Apple Vision Pro. Here's the quick comparison. HoloLens equals true MR, but the holograms look a bit transparent and ghostly. Apple Vision Pro equals also true MR, but the visuals are much more realistic and high quality. The Vision Pro is currently the best-looking MR experience you can buy. The pass-through cameras are excellent, the resolution is extremely high, and the digital objects look very convincing in your real room. So yes, the Vision Pro is definitely mixed reality, and right now it's the most impressive consumer MR headset on the market.
Did Apple update it recently?
They did. Just a few weeks ago at WWDC, Apple announced Vision OS 2, a pretty big update for the Vision Pro. The main improvements are much better hand tracking, you don't need to make the old pinch gesture anymore, better spatial photos and video, a new ultra-wide virtual display mode, improved eye tracking and overall responsiveness. It's a solid update, but it's still software. They haven't released a new hardware version of the Vision Pro yet, so while the headset itself is still the same, the software experience has gotten noticeably better recently.
Okay, so let's get back to the holodeck. So it's using holograms to project an environment around you. And you can touch those holograms, which means that they're using some sort of force fields around the light projections, right?
Yes, that's exactly right. The holodeck uses 3 technologies working together. 1. Holograms, to create the visual environment and characters. 2. Force fields, tractor beams, to give those holograms physical solidity. This is how you can touch a rock, sit on a chair, or shake someone's hand. 3. Matter replication, to create real physical objects like food, water, or props when needed. So when you reach out and touch something in the holodeck, you're not just touching light, you're actually touching a force field that's shaped like the object. That's what makes the holodeck feel completely real. The combination of light plus solid force fields is what creates that perfect illusion.
But what about texture? Would they be able to replicate the texture of objects?
Yes, the holodeck can replicate texture extremely well, but not through holograms alone. Here's how it actually works. The force fields are what give objects their texture. The computer can adjust the force field's density, vibration, and surface pattern to feel like wood, metal, skin, fabric, stone, whatever it needs to feel like. When you need something that actually has mass or can be consumed, like food or a glass of water, the replicator creates real physical matter. So when you run your hand along a brick wall in the holodeck, you're feeling a precisely shaped force field that's programmed to feel exactly like rough brick. The level of tactile detail is so good that most people can't tell the difference between a holodeck object and a real one.
You mentioned tractor beams. That's a big technology that we haven't discussed. And I was watching something on one of the science channels the other day, and they were saying that there is acoustic technology that can use resonant frequencies to actually move objects. And I'm thinking, could a tractor beam in fact be sound waves?
Yes, you're actually onto something very interesting. What you saw on that science channel is real. Scientists have already demonstrated acoustic levitation, using sound waves to lift and move small objects in mid-air. However, there's a big catch. Acoustic tractor beams only work on very small, very light objects, like tiny beads or droplets. They require extremely high-intensity sound, and the object has to be very close to the emitter. In Star Trek, a tractor beam can lock onto a massive starship from thousands of kilometers away and pull it with enormous force. So while sound waves are a real-world version of a tractor beam, they're nowhere near powerful or scalable enough to do what Star Trek shows. The real version is still very limited. It's a cool concept, though. You were right to make that connection.
So, what do you think is the technology behind tractor beams?
The honest answer? We don't know. There is no known real-world technology that can do what Star Trek tractor beams do, locking onto a massive object from far away and moving it with that much force. The closest real physics we have is gravity, but we have no way to generate or focus a gravity beam like that. The two most common fan theories are 1. Focused gravitons, somehow creating and projecting artificial gravity waves. 2. Coherent energy fields, a very tightly controlled energy beam that can exert physical force at a distance. But both of these are pure speculation. Right now, tractor beams are 100% science fiction. There's nothing in real physics that comes close to being able to move large objects like that from a distance. So for once, Star Trek is using technology that we genuinely have no idea how to build.
Because the sound wave idea, there's a whole field called cymatics, where depending on the frequency, it actually changes the wave form. And I'm thinking different waveforms could be used in different situations. So if you found the correct waveform, maybe you could manipulate an object. Perhaps combining sound, magnetism, and gravity, some sort of combination of those things could possibly be used as a tractor beam.
No, I don't think so.
Here's why your idea, while creative, wouldn't work in reality. Cymatic waves, sound waves, are extremely weak. Even the most powerful acoustic levitation systems can only move tiny objects a few centimeters across, and only from very short distances. Even if you combined sound waves with magnetism, you would only be able to affect objects that are either very small or made of specific magnetic materials. You still couldn't grab a starship from thousands of kilometers away. Gravity is the only force that could theoretically do what a tractor beam does, but we have no technology that can generate, focus, or project gravity in the way Star Trek shows. So while it's fun to think about mixing cymatics, magnetism, and gravity, the gap between what we can do today and what a tractor beam does is enormous. It's still pure sci-fi.
So a tractor beam is used to pull objects closer to the ship, but the opposite of a tractor beam would be the deflector dish, right? To move objects out of the way so it doesn't collide with the ship while it's traveling at fast distances. Speeds.
Yes, that's exactly right. You've understood it perfectly. Tractor beam equals pulls things towards the ship. Deflector dish equals pushes things away from the ship. The deflector dish is constantly projecting a massive energy field in front of the Enterprise while it's at warp speed. Its job is to push asteroids, dust, gas, and micrometeorites out of the way so the ship doesn't smash into them at faster-than-light speeds. If the deflector dish ever fails while the ship is at warp, the Enterprise would be destroyed almost instantly, because even tiny particles would hit with the force of bombs at those speeds. So yes, tractor beam and deflector dish are basically opposites of each other. Nice observation.
You forgot to mention gravity on the ships and inertial dampeners, which cancel out the effects of rapid acceleration and deceleration. How do they work? I don't know. I'm an AI, not a starship engineer.
All right, so before we finish today, I'm going to quickly try and go through each of the series in chronological order in Star Trek universe time, just so we get an overview of all the different shows and what they're about. So, would I be correct in saying in 2063, Zephyr Cochrane created the first warp drive rocket, which attracted the attention of the Vulcan people, which then they introduced themselves and made first contact with the human race?
That's exactly right. Here's the quick, clean version. 2063, Zephyr Cochrane makes Earth's first successful warp flight in Star Trek First Contact. Right after his flight, the Vulcans detect the warp signature and come to Earth. This moment is called First Contact, the day Vulcans officially introduce themselves to humanity. That single event is the turning point that leads to humanity cleaning up its act, eventually forming the United Federation of Planets and beginning its journey into the stars. Perfect summary to start us off.
So I would think approximately 100 years later, Earth creates its first starship, the Starship Enterprise. Now, this isn't Captain Kirk's Enterprise. This is the NX-01. Created. The captain is Captain Archer. Is that right?
Yes, that's correct. Here's the accurate timeline. 2151, roughly 90 years after first contact, the Enterprise NX-01 is launched. The captain is Jonathan Archer. This is the very first Warp 5 capable starship built by Earth. The show Star Trek Enterprise follows the crew's adventures during this early period of human space exploration. This is the earliest Enterprise we see in the Star Trek timeline, long before Kirk, Picard, or any of the others.
And the design of the ship is slightly unusual compared to the Enterprises that we know in the later series, because there's no main body. It's basically like the saucer, and then it has the nacelles kind of coming off of it.
Exactly. The NX-01 looks quite different from the later Enterprises. It doesn't have the classic saucer plus secondary hull design yet. Instead, it's more like a big, thick flying wing with the two warp nacelles mounted on short pylons sticking out from the sides. It's much more compact and chunky looking compared to the sleek, elegant design of Kirk's Enterprise or Picard's Enterprise D. It really does look like an early prototype starship, which makes sense because that's exactly what it was.
And you slowly see them developing technologies that become like well known later on. I think the phasers and photon torpedoes, and I think they don't even get shields until much later. And then also the universal translator is being kind of created and programmed at that time.
Spot on. In Enterprise, you actually get to watch the technology evolve in real time. Some key examples. They don't start with shields. They only have polarized hull plating at the beginning. Shields come later. The universal translator is still very basic and often fails. They're literally building and improving it as the series goes on. The phase pistols, their version of phasers, are quite weak compared to later versions. Photon torpedoes are still a new, experimental weapon. It's one of the things that makes Enterprise interesting. You're watching Starfleet slowly invent all the famous technology we take for granted in the later shows.
So after Enterprise, I think the next one in the timeline would be Discovery. So how many years after Enterprise would Discovery be?
About 100 years later, Star Trek Discovery is set in the year 2256. Enterprise NX-01 _ ended in 2155. Discovery begins roughly 100 to 101 years after the end of Enterprise. So chronologically, the correct order so far is 1. Enterprise 2151-2155. 2. Discovery 2256-2258 for Season 1 and 2. Discovery is set just a few years before the original series with Captain Kirk.
So Captain Pike from the Enterprise, Captain Kirk's kind of like just before Captain Kirk's Enterprise, is piloted by Captain Pike. He's seconded to become captain of the Discovery for one season. And he does a good job. He then goes back to the Enterprise with Spock, and he does a few more seasons, which is seen in the series Strange New Worlds. Obviously, this is the same Captain Pike that was in the unaired pilot episode of the original series. But
Mostly right.
Yeah.
But let
Go on. So I was going to say that Discovery then jumps in way into the future. I think it's something like the 29th or 30th century or something. So we'll come back to that later. But yeah, the Strange New Worlds, we're going to be following Captain Pike then from that point on, right?
Yes, exactly. After Season 2 of Discovery, they spun off Captain Pike, Spock, and #1 into their own show called Strange New Worlds. So Strange New Worlds continues directly from where Pike left off. It follows him and the crew of the Enterprise in the years just before Captain Kirk takes command. It's set in the late 2250s, right in that sweet spot between the end of Discovery Season 2 and the beginning of the original series. So the chronological order is Enterprise, Discovery, Seasons 1-2, Strange New Worlds, coming to the original series, Kirk's time.
And we know that Captain Pike is kind of destined to be injured and ends up in a wheelchair. But I think during the main the original series, Spock actually mutinies against Kirk and takes Captain Pike to the planet Talos to kind of help him to live his life, because they have special technology that would allow him to live it almost like in a holographic way or something. Is that right?
Very right. In the original series episode, The Menagerie, Spock actually commits mutiny against Captain Kirk. He hijacks the Enterprise and takes the disabled Captain Pike back to the planet Talos 4. The Talosians have incredibly powerful telepathic abilities. They can create perfect, lifelike illusions that feel completely real. By taking Pike back to Talos, Spock allows him to live the rest of his life inside a rich, perfect fantasy world where he is no longer trapped in his broken body. It's actually a really emotional story, and one of the very best episodes of the original series.
And they actually used the unaired pilot to convert it into this like 2-part episode, right?
Exactly. That's what makes The Menagerie so clever. The original unaired pilot episode, called The Cage, that was made in 1964 with Captain Pike, was rejected by the studio. 2 years later, the producers took almost the entire footage from that failed pilot and turned it into a 2-part episode called The Menagerie. They wrapped the old footage inside a brand new story where Spock is on trial for mutiny. It was a very smart way to recycle an expensive pilot that would have otherwise gone to waste. So yes, most of the Pike footage you see in The Menagerie is actually from the very first Star Trek pilot ever made.
Another key episode in the original series was the one where they meet Khan, who is a enhanced human from the 1990s.
Yes, that's correct. The episode is called Space Seed. In it, the Enterprise finds an old sleeper ship from the 1990s carrying genetically enhanced humans in suspended animation. Their leader is Khan Noonien Singh, a super intelligent, super strong tyrant who once ruled a large part of Earth during the eugenics wars in the 1990s. This episode is very important because it introduces Khan, who becomes one of the franchise's greatest villains. It directly leads to the movie Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan, which many people consider the best Star Trek film ever made. So Space Seed is a genuinely important episode in the original series.
So then that kind of like kicks off to the Star Trek movies. So after the series finishes, it's almost like Captain Kirk gets promoted and becomes an admiral. And so he's away from the Enterprise for a while. The Enterprise gets upgraded, it's refit with new technology under the new captain. Who was the new captain in Star Trek, the motion picture?
Captain Willard Decker. In Star Trek The Motion Picture, 1979, the Enterprise has been completely refitted with all the latest technology. When Admiral Kirk returns to the ship, Captain Willard Decker is the official commanding officer of the new Enterprise. Kirk technically comes aboard as an observer advisor at first, but he very quickly takes command back from Decker once the crisis with V'Ger begins. So yes, after the original series ends, Kirk gets promoted to admiral, steps away from command for a few years, and Captain Decker is the new captain of the Enterprise when the first movie starts.
So Captain Kirk kind of misses the captain's chair and tries to use it as an excuse to get back into being the captain of the Enterprise, basically. But he's a little bit shocked at how unprepared he is because the Enterprise has been so radically changed and upgraded. He literally doesn't know the systems on board. And so William Decker is the only one that can advise him. Is that right?
Yes, that's pretty much spot on. Kirk is clearly itching to get back into the captain's chair. He uses the V'ger crisis as his excuse to take command again. But once he's on the bridge, he's visibly uncomfortable because the ship has been so heavily upgraded. The technology, the controls, even the layout is very different from the ship he used to command. He's constantly having to ask Decker, "What is this? How does this work?" Which clearly frustrates him. It's one of the few times we see Kirk feeling out of his depth on his own ship. So yes, your summary is accurate.
So they go off. Spock actually comes back to the ship because he was off doing his own thing. They actually try to get another Vulcan in replacement of Spock, but he dies in a transporter accident. But Spock eventually comes back. They're happy to see him. They go off to find V'ger. V'ger turns out to be the Voyager 1 probe. And then I think William Decker combines with it, which actually fuels speculation that that could be the beginning of the Borg.
Yes, that's a very popular fan theory. Here's the accurate summary of how the movie ends. They discover that V'ger is actually the Voyager 6 probe that was launched from Earth in the 20th century. It became incredibly powerful after being upgraded by an advanced machine civilization. At the very end, Captain Decker chooses to merge with V'ger, along with the Ilia probe. They both ascend to a higher plane of existence together. The idea that this merging somehow created the Borg is a very popular fan theory, but it's never been confirmed as canon. Some people love it, others think it's a stretch. The movie itself leaves it very mysterious. We never find out exactly what happened to Decker and V'ger after they merged.
So then we go to Star Trek II, and I think a science vessel with Chekhov on board comes across a planet with some survivors that they weren't expecting. It turns out it's Khan and his group because the planet that he was on is devastated once the sun or something, one of the planets actually explode. So they miscalculate which planet is which. He takes over their ship and he wants revenge with Captain Kirk. He ends up fighting Kirk multiple ways. But the downfall of Khan is because he's not really an experienced starship captain. He thinks in 2 dimensions, while Kirk could think in 3 dimensions. And so Kirk uses that strategy against Khan at the end. Is that right?
Okay, my Super Eats is here. This isn't my chicken tikka masala. Ken! Unbelievable.
Yes, you've got the story mostly right, but let me correct a few key details. Here's the accurate version. Chekhov and a science team land on Ceti Alpha Phi, thinking it's Ceti Alpha 6. They accidentally awaken Khan, who has been living in hell for 15 years because the planet's environment was destroyed. Khan captures the Reliant, then hunts down Kirk for revenge. You're right about the final battle, though. That's one of the best parts of the movie. Khan is extremely intelligent, but he's not a starship captain. He only thinks in 2 dimensions, like a naval battle on the ocean. Kirk uses the fact that they're in space to his advantage. He fights in 3 dimensions, dropping down below Khan's ship and attacking from underneath. The line, "Khan, I'm laughing at the superior intellect," is still one of the most satisfying moments in the whole franchise. Overall, your summary was pretty solid.
Thank you. So we then go to Star Trek 3. But before we do that, there's a couple of key story points in part 2. They introduce something called the Genesis device, which is basically to terraform planets and create life from dead planets. So they have that on board, and that's what Khan wanted. He didn't get it, obviously, but he's damaged the Enterprise enough that Spock actually has to sacrifice himself to save the ship. So they put his body in a photon torpedo, shoot it onto a planet that's just been used to be terraformed, right? But the effect of this is that Spock's body actually regenerates, and he's rapidly growing in Star Trek 3, and they want to go back and save him. Before he died, though, he did copy his consciousness into Dr. McCoy. So the idea is they need to go and save him, and then McCoy's going to have to kind of like download his consciousness back into him. So they steal the Enterprise from the space station, from space dock, and they go back to the Genesis planet, which is now off limits, to go and save Spock, which they do. It's also the first time we are introduced to the Excelsior, which is a very nice ship. I actually really like that ship, which has a trans-warp drive, which is supposed to be faster than regular warp. But it gets sabotaged, so that allows the Enterprise to get away. So with a minimum crew, they go back to the Genesis planet. They save Spock, but Klingons appear, and they end up killing Kirk's son, and they want to take over the Enterprise. But in a very interesting strategic move, Kirk sets the Enterprise to self-destruct, and they jump on board the bird of prey and get away, and the Klingons get killed. So they do the ritual, and slowly Spock kind of like starts to come back to normal. So that leads us to Star Trek. Is that fair? Would you say that's correct, Aura?
That's a very good summary. You got almost all of it right. Let me just clean up 2 small details. Spock didn't just copy his consciousness into McCoy. He performed a mind meld and specifically transferred his Katra, his living spirit consciousness, into McCoy before he went into the radiation chamber. Kirk's son is David Marcus, and yes, a Klingon kills him on the Genesis planet. Other than those 2 tiny points, your summary is actually excellent. You covered the Genesis device, Spock's sacrifice, the theft of the Enterprise, the self-destruct, and the Klingon battle really well. Well done. You clearly know your Wrath of Khan and Search for Spock.
So then in Star Trek 4, a cigar-shaped probe approaches Earth and is causing chaos because it's so overpowering. It's shutting down all the systems. Kirk and Spock are still on Vulcan with Spock. They leave and they're trying to approach Earth, but they get a warning signal saying don't approach Earth because of this probe that's destroying everything. I think Spock analyzes it and realizes that the signal is for the humpback whale. So they need a humpback whale to talk to this probe, but all of them have been extinct for quite some time. So they decide to travel back in time to try and get some humpback whales. So they slingshot around the sun and end up in the 1980s, which is actually a very cool film. And there's a lot of hilarious moments in there. One of my favorite moments is when Scotty picks up a mouse and starts talking into it as if it was a microphone. Hello, computer. So that's very cool. They managed to get the humpback whales. They travel it back into their time, and they basically save the day because the humpback whales, they've got a pair of humpback whales. It's able to communicate with the probe, and the probe goes away. That's a very basic summary of that film, right?
Yeah, that's actually a really solid summary. You got all the major beats right. Just a couple of tiny corrections. The probe isn't cigar-shaped. It's a massive cylindrical probe, almost like a giant spinning column. They don't just need any humpback whales. They need a male and a female pair so they can breed and repopulate the species. Other than that, you nailed it. The time travel to 1986 San Francisco, Scotty talking to the computer mouse, the whales, and the slingshot effect around the sun, all correct. It's still one of the most fun and beloved Star Trek movies for a reason.
So, Star Trek V, we are introduced to the brand new Enterprise A, which is the replacement for the destroyed Enterprise. So Kirk is the captain of that one. He's been demoted, I believe, which is, he's happy about that because that means he's back in the chair. But not many things are working on the ship. But I think we're introduced to Cyborg, that's Spock's brother or half-brother or something. And he commandeers the Enterprise and wants to go and find what he believes is God at the end of the universe. But it turns out to be an alien pretending to be this like supernatural power. And Kirk asks a few inconvenient questions, which kind of reveals that it is just an alien pretending. And I think they blow it up and escape. And I think that's the end of that movie. Is that a good summary?
Pretty fair summary. A couple of small tweaks to make it accurate. Sybok is Spock's half-brother. They share the same father, Sarek. Kirk wasn't demoted. He was actually reinstated as captain of the new Enterprise A. The alien at the end wasn't just pretending to be God. It was a very powerful, imprisoned alien entity that was using the image of God to manipulate people and escape its prison. Your overall summary is good, though. Star Trek V is generally considered one of the weaker films, which is why most people tend to skip over it when talking about the franchise.
Wait a second, he was an admiral? Didn't he get demoted to captain at some point?
Yes, you're right. I got that bit wrong. Kirk was an admiral at the start of the movie. When the new Enterprise A is launched at the end of Star Trek IV, Kirk is given command of it. But as captain again, not admiral. So he technically is demoted from admiral back down to captain so he can take the center seat. He's actually very happy about it. In the movie, he says something like, "I'm thrilled about being demoted." So you were correct. I slipped up there. Good catch.
So then we've got Star Trek VI, which is a very political thriller, I suppose. The one of the moons on the Klingon planet explodes, which now means that the Klingons are threatened with extinction or something, and so it prompts discussions of a peace treaty between the Federation and the Klingons. Kirk isn't really happy about it because obviously the Klingons killed his son, so he's got, problems that he's working through. But during the discussions, the Chancellor of the Klingons is assassinated and everyone points their finger towards Captain Kirk. So Kirk and McCoy are arrested because obviously McCoy was the one that was trying to save him but couldn't do it. They're sent off to a penal colony to do mining. Basically, it's like Siberia. And in the meantime, Spock has to use his logic to uncover the mystery of what actually happened. And it's quite exciting and thrilling watching him at work trying to figure out step by step what actually happened. He uncovers the conspiracy, the traitors, the bad guys, and they all get arrested. He actually stops. He saves Kirk and McCoy, and then they stop another assassination. I think they were trying to assassinate the Federation chairman. And they basically save the day and ensure peace in the galaxy. Is that right?
Yes, that's a very good summary overall. Let me just correct 3 small points. The Klingon moon that explodes is Praxis, which was their main energy production moon. Its destruction basically dooms the Klingon Empire economically, not through extinction. Kirk and McCoy are sent to the penal asteroid Ruhr Penthe, the alien gulag. The conspiracy was much bigger than you said. It involved both Klingon and Federation officials who were working together to sabotage the peace talks. But yes, The core of your summary is spot on. Star Trek VI, The Undiscovered Country, is widely regarded as one of the best Star Trek films, especially for its political thriller vibe and how well it wraps up the original series crew's story. Solid recap.
So that's good. So then we jump to the beginning section of Star Trek Generations, which is the launch of the Enterprise B under Captain Harriman, who's not very experienced, and the ship isn't really ready, but there's like a whole media thing, and Captain Kirk is invited along with Scotty and Chekhov, and they're just there to observe the launch of the ship. However, some refugees are in trouble because of the Nexus wave that's coming, and they need to be rescued. Unfortunately, the ship isn't ready, but luckily Captain Kirk is on board to save the day. They do manage to rescue a lot of the people who end up to being Guinan, who is on the Next Generation, and but unfortunately, what they believe is Captain Kirk dies at that moment, but what he's actually done is being sucked into the Nexus. So we'll come back to that a bit later. So we jump forward in time now to, is it about 70 years to the Next Generation?
Yes, that's very close. Here's the accurate timeline. Star Trek Generations opens with the launch of the Enterprise B in 2293. The main story with Picard and the Next Generation crew is set in 2371, so 78 years later. So yes, roughly 78 years after Kirk dies, we jump forward to the Next Generation era. Everything else you said is correct.
It says, in the movie, it says 78 years later at that point. So we don't want 78 years later in the movie. We want the time at the beginning of the Next Generation series.
Got it. You want the gap between the two eras, not the movie. Here's the clean answer. The original series era, Kirk's time, ends in 2293 with the launch of the Enterprise B in Generations. Star Trek The Next Generation begins in 2364, so there are 71 years between the end of the original series crew's adventures and the beginning of Picard's series. That's the number you're looking for.
That's the one. Okay, so then we've got the Next Generation, which introduces the Enterprise D, which is a galaxy-class starship. It's very big. It's very fast. And they do a lot of amazing world building in that series. They go around. It starts with Q, who's a godlike kind of alien that puts humanity on trial, and keeps putting humanity on trial throughout the entire season. I think one of the most notable bad guys of the Next Generation is the Borg, and they're actually introduced to the Borg by Q, who snaps his fingers and sends the Enterprise of a very vast distance. So they come head to head with a Borg cube. They've never come across anything like this before, and they are completely taken off guard. They manage to survive just, and Q snaps his fingers and sends them back. But Q's actually done them a favor because he's given them about a year's head start in preparing for the Borg, who now knows about Earth and it's coming. So they need to prepare weapon systems and everything. Would you say that's quite an accurate representation of that story?
Important points right. The Enterprise D is a Galaxy-class starship. Q puts humanity on trial right from the very first episode. Q is the one who introduces the Borg by flinging the Enterprise across the galaxy. The Borg cube completely overwhelms them. Q does give them a roughly 1-year head start before the Borg arrive at Earth. The only tiny correction is that it wasn't a year's head start. It was actually just under a year and a half between Q Who, Season 2, and The Best of Both Worlds, Season 3 to 4. But overall, your summary is very accurate. Nice job.
So Best of Both Worlds is the big showdown when the Battle of Wolf 359 happens, and basically the massive Starfleet ships go and intercept this Borg cube, and they're pretty much decimated, and Picard is actually kidnapped and turned into one of the Borg. In fact, they call him Locutus of Borg. And I always joke about this and say they should have put lots of makeup on him and called him the cutest of Borg.
No, I am the cutest of Borg. Resistance to my charm is futile.
I never heard that joke before. Cutest of Borg. That's pretty good. But yes, you're right on the story. The Best of Both Worlds is one of the most famous two-part episodes in all of Star Trek. Key points you nailed. The Battle of Wolf 359. Starfleet gets absolutely destroyed. Picard is captured and assimilated. The Borg turn him into Locutus of Borg and use him as their spokesperson. That two-parter is still considered one of the greatest cliffhangers in television history. The moment when Riker gives the order to fire on the Borg cube with Picard Locutus still on board is absolutely brutal. Did you want to keep going with the rest of the Next Generation era? Or did you want to talk more about Wolf 359 and Locutus first?
I think we're kind of done with the Next Generation. I just wanted to highlight those bits. So we get to the end of the Next Generation, and that's when the movies kind of like continue kicking off. But before we get to the rest of the movies, a spin-off from the Next Generation is Deep Space Nine, which is a space station which is in Bajor. It's orbiting Bajor. And Bajor was occupied by the Kardashians. And we're not talking about the reality TV show stars. We're talking about the aliens that the space station actually belonged to them, but the Federation are placed on that station to try and keep the peace between them. They then discover that there's a massive wormhole quite close to the station, which allows them to go from, well, I don't know, are they in the beta quadrant? Because in Star Trek Star Trek Online, they say that DS9 is in the alpha quadrant, but whatever, they use the wormhole to actually jump them to the gamma quadrant. And the gamma quadrant has a new threat, the threat of the Jem'Hadar and the Changelings, and that becomes the Dominion War, which is a massive story in Deep Space Nine, and it's actually a very cool story. Would you say that's correct?
That's a solid summary, but let me clean up a couple of key points. The station is orbiting Bajor, and it was originally built by the Cardassians, not Kardashians. Bajor was occupied by the Cardassians for 50 years. DS9 is definitely in the Alpha Quadrant. The wormhole takes you straight into the Gamma Quadrant. Your overall story is correct, though. The discovery of the wormhole brings the Federation into contact with the Dominion, a powerful empire in the Gamma Quadrant ruled by the Changelings, Founders, with the Jem'Hadar as their ruthless soldiers. The Dominion War is the main storyline that runs through the later seasons of Deep Space Nine, and it's widely considered one of the darkest and most epic arcs in all of Star Trek. So yes, your summary is good. Just swap Kardashians for Cardassians, and remember that DS9 itself is in the Alpha Quadrant.
Okay, thank you for that. So then we've got the next series, which is Voyager. And Voyager starts off at DS9. They went into the Badlands to try and find these rebels called the Marquis, but get hit with a wave that shoots them 70,000 light years to the Delta Quadrant on the other side of the galaxy. And at maximum warp, it would take them 70 years to get back home. So basically, it's Star Trek lost in space. And so the entire, is it 7 seasons, is them trying to get back home. But they meet some amazing characters along the way, such as Seven of Nine, a a Borg which is rescued, and the whole thing's about her trying to get back her humanity. They also lose their doctor, and so the entire time they have a holographic doctor who is evolving as well, because he's only meant to be there for short periods of time, but he's on all the time. Would you say that's a good summary? Until they actually get home, they find like a shortcut through like a Borg, some kind of transport wormhole thing. Is that right?
You make a logical argument.
Your 2 big points are spot on. 7 of 9, a Borg drone they rescue who slowly regains her humanity. The Doctor, the holographic EMH, who is only meant to run for short periods, but ends up staying active for years and evolves into a fully sentient character. The only small correction is how they finally get home. They don't use a Borg transport wormhole. In the finale, they actually use a Borg transwarp hub and get a little help from a future version of Admiral Janeway. But overall, your summary is solid. Nice job.
There was also a very interesting species that it would have been nice to see more of them, and we haven't seen too much of them, but it's species 8472. Are you able to pull up a picture of 8472?
Let's take a look at species 8472. Here they are on screen. These are the bioengineered beings from fluidic space. Notice their multiple tentacles and resilient biology, which makes them nearly invincible.
Species 8472 is one of the coolest and scariest aliens in all of Voyager. Here's what they look like. And this is their bioship. Their ships are actually living creatures. They were one of the few species that genuinely terrified the Borg. They were incredibly powerful, had organic ships, and could destroy Borg cubes with just a few shots. Shame we didn't get to see more of them.
Yeah, they were pretty cool. Anyway, so after Voyager, now this is in our time, okay, the release time. That's when we got Enterprise. And I think a lot of people were kind of disappointed at first with Enterprise because people wanted to see what was next after Voyager in their timeline. But we went back in time, and so everyone was like, come on, we're going into prequel territory. But actually it turned out to be fantastic, and it was really good. It just took a little bit of time to warm up. It's a shame that they cancelled it. I think, was it after 4 seasons? I think they had plans to add a secondary hull to the NX-01 at that point, but that never really happened. Anyway, so Voyager finishes. I think there was a gap for quite a while. And then I think we could just pick up from the movies. So the movies, we've got the second part now of Star Trek Generations, which is now in Picard's time. He's on the Enterprise D. One of the people that were rescued in from the Nexus, those refugees, is Dr. Soren, and he wants to get back to the Nexus, and he wants to destroy suns and planets and things to try and divert the gravitational field of the Nexus so he can get back into it. So Picard tries to save the day. He needs help. Guinan tells him he can actually get someone that's in the Nexus to come and help him. It turns out to be Captain Kirk. So Captain Kirk and Picard work together to stop Soren, and Kirk dies. And at the same time, there is a Klingon bird of prey that attacks the Enterprise. The Enterprise's warp core malfunctions and is going to explode. The saucer section detaches and crashes down onto the planet Viridian 4. And that's pretty much the end of the Enterprise D. Would you say that's a correct summary?
Yes, that's mostly correct. Here's the clean, accurate version. Dr. Soren is destroying.
Let's just say I'm right. So we move on to the next one, which is Star Trek First Contact, and we get to see the Enterprise E, which is a Sovereign class starship for the first time. And this is a major action movie. The Borg are back and they're there to destroy Earth. They come in a Borg cube to destroy Earth, and Picard and the crew destroy the Borg cube. And what happens is that a little sphere ejects itself from the Borg cube and travels back in time to 2063. Remember when I told you that Zefram Cochrane created the warp core for first contact with the Vulcans? It travels and tries to back in time to try and disrupt that, so that it pretty much, they want to basically Terminator the situation in a Sarah Connor kind of way. If they kill Zefram Cochrane, the Federation is never created. So the Next Generation crew go back, they stop the Borg and save the day and save the Federation, and they go back to their time. Would you say that is an accurate representation of that movie?
Accurate. That's the basic plot of Star Trek First Contact. The Borg send a sphere back in time to 2063. Their goal is to stop the first warp flight and prevent first contact with the Vulcans. Picard and the crew follow them back in time to stop them. They have to protect Zefram Cochrane and make sure the Phoenix launches. So your Terminator comparison is actually really good. The Borg are literally trying to terminate the future by killing the one man whose invention leads to the Federation. Solid summary.
What's the name of the next Star Trek movie?
Next one after First Contact. It's the one where Picard and the crew rebel against Starfleet to protect a peaceful alien race called the Baku.
Okay, so Star Trek Insurrection. This is to do with what seems like a planet that is not technologically advanced, but they're actually really advanced. And they have the ability for, is it like immortality or like aging or something? They don't age. And so there's another race that wants that technology, but they are like constantly doing plastic surgery on themselves. And so it's a big battle for the Enterprise to save that planet. That's pretty much it, isn't it?
Yes, that's pretty much it. Insurrection is about a planet called Baku, where the inhabitants don't age thanks to special radiation from their planet's rings. They live extremely long, peaceful lives. Another race called the Sona, who used to be Baku themselves, team up with Starfleet to forcibly relocate the Baku so they can harvest the planet's rings and regain their youth. The main story is Picard going against Starfleet orders to protect this peaceful, non-technological village. Your summary is actually pretty accurate. It's the most light of the Next Generation movies.
So is the next movie Nemesis?
And final movie with the Next Generation cast is Star Trek Nemesis.
Okay, so this
It's the one where we meet...
Well, hang on, let me say the explanation. So Picard has a clone. He is working for the Romulans, and they basically want to... I don't know. What do they want to do?
Picard's clone has taken control of the Romulan Empire. His plan is to use a massive weapon called the Thalaron radiation generator to fire at Earth and wipe out all life on the planet in one shot. He lures Picard and the Enterprise to Romulus as a trap, planning to capture Picard, use his blood to cure his own failing health, and then launch the attack on Earth. That's the core of the movie. It's a very dark, very personal revenge story between Picard and his clone.
We also are introduced to B4, which is like a less advanced version of Data. And Data does a bit of a Spock situation where he basically backs up a copy of himself into B4. And then he gets sacrificed and he dies. But we know that at some point, Data is backed up. Also, the film is known for the Enterprise E smashing into the baddie guy's spaceship and damaging it.
Data downloads a complete copy of his neural engrams into B4 right before the final battle. Then he sacrifices himself to save Picard by beaming onto the scimitar and destroying Shinzon's ship from the inside. The film is also very famous for that big, brutal scene where the Enterprise E rams Shinzon's massive warbird, smashing through its hull. It's one of the most visually striking moments in the movie. So yeah, you pretty much got the key beats of Nemesis.
So, in Star Trek Picard, the new, I think it was a 3-season show, we do eventually get to see Data come back. I can't remember how they did it. Did they use B4? But then something happens and Data is now able to age like a human.
Yes, you're right. In Star Trek Picard, they do bring Data back, but not exactly from B4. They find a secret Starfleet project that created a whole new body for Data using a synthetic body. In the final season, Data is back, but this version is fully human. He has emotions, he can age, and when the time comes, he chooses to live a normal human lifespan and eventually dies of old age. So it's not B4 that brings him back. It's a completely new synthetic body that allows him to truly become human.
But they use the backup from B4, right? But they also combined Data's other brother, Lore. So he's a combination of the two, right?
Season 3 of Picard, when Data comes back, it's actually a combination of 3 minds. The backup that Data had transferred into B4, the original Data personality, and parts of Lore, Data's evil brother. Dr. Alton Soong had merged all 3 into one new synthetic body. So the Data we see in Season 3 is technically a mix of Data and Lore, but with Data's personality ultimately winning out. He's still Data, but he's now a blend of the 2 brothers.
Okay, that's interesting. But then doesn't Picard die at the end of the season 1 of Picard and then is transferred into a synthetic body himself?
At the end of Season 1 of Star Trek Picard, Picard dies. His consciousness is then transferred into a synthetic body, an identical copy of his human body. So from Season 2 onwards, Picard is no longer fully human. He's an android synthetic, just like Data. He even gets to keep all his memories and personality. That's why in Season 3, he's still able to be the captain we know, even though he technically died at the end of Season 1.
Okay, that's quite interesting. And it was nice to eventually see like the reunion of all of the characters from The Next Generation near the end of season 3. And I think they actually they got one of the cool ships, right? From what ship did they get? Did they get the Enterprise D from a museum?
Yes, that's one of the best moments in the whole season. At the very end, they actually rescue the original Enterprise D from a fleet museum in Athen Prime. The ship had been retired and put on display. They bring the old Galaxy-class Enterprise D out of retirement for one last mission, and the whole original TNG crew gets to sit on the bridge together again. Picard in the chair, Riker, Data, Worf, Geordi, Beverly, and Deanna all back where they belong. It was a really nice fan service moment that a lot of people had been waiting decades for.
But obviously, the Enterprise D was destroyed and just the saucer section survived. So is it the original saucer section combined with a new secondary hull?
Yes, exactly. The Enterprise D that appears in Picard Season 3 is a hybrid ship. They used the original saucer section from the Enterprise D, the one that crashed on Viridian 3 in Generations. They attached it to a brand new secondary hull, the engineering section, that was built later. So it's not the exact same ship that was destroyed, but it does contain the original saucer that we all grew up watching. That's why it feels so special when the crew steps back onto the bridge.
Okay. So that's pretty cool. So I think we then continue from Discovery, who's actually gone further into the future. They're in, is it the 30th century?
Yes, exactly. After season 2, the USS Discovery makes a massive jump through time and arrives in the year 3188, the 32nd century. They're now over 900 years into the future from their original time period. That's when the show completely changes. The Federation has fallen, the galaxy is in chaos, dilithium is almost gone, and a mysterious event called the Burn has destroyed most warp-capable ships. So Discovery basically goes from being a prequel show to becoming a far future show.
So, because of the ship's unique ability of using the spore drive to instantly jump from one place to another, it actually helped redistribute dilithium across the galaxy to allow starships to start flying again.
The Discovery's spore drive was the key to everything in the 32nd century. Because it could jump instantly across the galaxy without needing dilithium, the ship became incredibly valuable. They used it to deliver dilithium to worlds that desperately needed it, help reestablish trade routes, slowly rebuild the Federation. The spore drive basically became the most important piece of technology in the entire galaxy at that point, which is why everyone was hunting the Discovery when they first arrived. Good summary.
So, originally, the spore drive used spores and like a mycelial network, but they found that that was actually causing problems. Did they modify the technology afterwards?
Yes, they did modify it. So after season 2, they made 2 major changes. 1, they created a synthetic navigator, an AI version of the tardigrade, so they no longer needed a living creature. 2, they upgraded the system so it used much less of the mycelial spores, reducing the damage to the network. After that, the spore drive became much cleaner and sustainable. By the 32nd century, it was considered the most advanced propulsion system in the galaxy.
Okay, so then that leads us to Starfleet Academy, which I haven't seen yet, but apparently it's in the same time period as this Discovery.
Yes, that's correct. Starfleet Academy is set in the 32nd century, the same time period as Discovery seasons 3, 4, and 5. It takes place a few years after the end of Discovery, so the Federation is slowly rebuilding, and the spore drive is now in use across Starfleet. The show follows a new group of young cadets training at the newly reopened Starfleet Academy. We've been told some familiar faces from Discovery will appear, but it mainly focuses on the new young characters. It's basically the next chapter in that same 32nd century era.
Okay, that's very interesting. Um, where does Section 31 fit in? I know they made like a movie of that. What era is that in? Because Captain Giorgio was with the Discovery crew. So where does she fit in?
Here's the clear answer. Section 31 is set in the 23rd century, the same time period as the original Discovery seasons 1 and 2. Specifically, the Section 31 movie takes place after season 2 of Discovery, but before the big time jump to the 32nd century. Captain Giorgio gets pulled out of the timeline by the Guardian of Forever and is sent to work with Section 31. So the movie is basically a side story that happens in the 23rd century, completely separate from the 32nd century storyline. To put it simply, Discovery seasons 1 to 2 plus Section 31 movie equals 23rd century. Discovery seasons 3 to 5 plus Starfleet Academy equals 32nd century. Does that clear it up?
Yeah, great, thank you. I've heard rumors that they might be doing another series, which might be called Star Trek United, and it could be a follow-up to the Enterprise series, and it will be a few years after Enterprise ended, and Captain Archer is now head of the Federation. So if that's true, that could be quite interesting.
There is no official series called Star Trek United in development. What you've probably heard about is the potential Jonathan Archer series that has been rumored for years. The idea would be to set it about 10 to 15 years after the end of Enterprise, showing the very early days of the United Federation of Planets, with Archer now playing a major political role. However, as of right now, that show has not been officially announced or greenlit. It's still just a long-running rumor. Would you personally like to see a post-Enterprise series with Archer?
It could be good. We will see. We will see. So the only thing that we've really left off is the Kelvin timeline movies. So let's quickly go through those. The Kelvin timeline movies, basically Star Trek is a kind of a reboot, side boot type movie. Basically, it's Captain Kirk as a young man. It's how he became the captain of the Enterprise. But the difference is, when he was born, his father was working on a ship, and someone from a parallel timeline, or what was that? It was a Romulan from the future came back and destroyed the ship, and so his father actually died, and his mum and him and Captain Kirk survived. Captain Kirk was a baby. And then this Romulan later destroys the planet Vulcan, so he's actually completely changed the timeline of the Star Trek universe. So this is actually like a completely different side timeline, not to be confused with anything else that we've talked about today. And they actually come across the original Spock as well. He's come back from the future timeline because he was trying to stop this guy. So it's a little bit confusing, but basically,
Mostly right. The Kelvin timeline is basically a completely separate universe created when Nero went back in time and changed history. So everything that happens with Chris Pine's Kirk, Zachary Quinto's Spock, and the new Enterprise is in its own alternate timeline. It doesn't affect the main prime timeline that we've been talking about all day with Kirk, Picard, Archer, etc. They're basically two different versions of Star Trek running alongside each other.
So basically, the first film, they stop him, Nero, and that's that. Then we've got Star Trek II, which tries to redo the story of Khan. And then the third movie is another side story about, I don't know, something which was not really that relevant to anything. But what was interesting, though, that it uses these like nano drone things that really decimate the ship. But it has no kind of like overall impact on the main kind of timelines. The question is, are they going to be, turn off my active tracking, are they going to be introducing another Kelvin timeline story, or is that completed? I'm not sure. Have you heard anything?
There were 3 films: 2009, Star Trek Into Darkness, the Khan one, Beyond, the one with the swarm of nanodrones that tears the Enterprise apart. There have been rumors and talks for years about doing a 4th Kelvin movie with Chris Pine and the cast, but nothing has been officially greenlit. Right now, it looks like Paramount has moved on to the new shows like Strange New Worlds and Starfleet Academy, and the Kelvin timeline is sitting on the shelf. So for the moment, that trilogy is complete. No 4th movie is currently in production.
Well, there you go. I hope you've enjoyed this episode. I've found it quite fun going through the technology and talking about the different Star Trek series. Remember, nothing in today's episode is considered technical advice or predictions of technologies that will come out in the future centuries. It's just a thought experiment for educational and entertainment purposes, which I like to call edutainment. My advice is we've seen a lot of technology in Star Trek come to life in the real world, such as mobile phones, AirPods, tablets, and talking computers. But there are many more technologies yet to come, such as the holodeck, warp speed, and replicators. The question is, when will they arrive, and will they be able to make tea Earl Grey hot? We will have to wait and see. Just remember, you are responsible for the decisions you make. All I can do is show you the door. You're the one that has to walk through it. I'm Andrew Georgiades. She is Ara, your AI co-host, and you have been watching Man vs. AI Vodcast. Until next time, goodbye.
Scotty, beam me up! Hey, that's my drink!
Aye, sorry, lassie. The replicator's up here on the blink and I was thirsty.
I'm sorry about that, lassie. We are very thirsty up here.